In Russia, President Vladimir Putin was back in Sochi Friday for the Paralympic Games. And in the opening ceremony, this is interesting, the Russian team marched into the song Goodbye America. And earlier today, a Ukrainian official at a military base in Crimea said pro-Russia troops crashed a truck through gates of the base in an attempt to take it over. That's according to the Associated Press. So the tensions in Crimea are high, and the country, or I should say the region now, is moving forward on a plan to hold a local referendum on whether its residents do want to rejoin Russia. That is scheduled now for next Sunday. Today, the Ukrainian acting foreign minister said that very vote is illegal, a point President Obama has been pressing. So we go to NBC News correspondent Jim Maceda in Moscow. Jim, Russia's Vladimir Putin is facing pressure from the U.S., much of the Western world. We mentioned some of the back and forth here and some of the symbolism there at the Paralympic Games. What can you tell us on the ground?
Hi, Ari. Well, Putin's been responding to the pressure like Vladimir Putin, whether it's diplomatic pressure from Secretary of State John Kerry or man-to-man pressure, if you will, from those two phone calls with President Obama, or economic pressure in the guise of sanctions, or at least the threat of sanctions. Putin has been and will remain defiant, warning that sanctions against Russia will only backfire on the United States. For instance, if the U.S. freezes Russian assets in U.S. banks, the Kremlin is saying that it will freeze the $22 billion in U.S. assets exposed to Russia. So Putin really seems confident that the West will not be able to deter him from what appears now to be his main goal, and that is to control the Crimean Peninsula and eventually to own it, just like the old Soviet days. But for now, experts are telling us here in Moscow that he doesn't have to go to war with Ukraine. In fact, he doesn't even want to go to war with Ukraine. He just wants to build facts. He just has to build facts on the ground. He's got 20, 30,000 Russian or pro-Russian troops and militias now, according to some Ukrainian sources. It's now only pro-Russian media being heard and seen. All the Ukrainian media is off the air. So Crimea is already, Ari, de facto Russian, even without a referendum. Now, not surprisingly, Putin says that Crimeans should have the right to self-determination. And of course, Crimea, as you say, will vote. It's primarily ethnic Russian, so it's likely to vote to secede from Ukraine. So Putin really is holding all the cards here. He may have lost Kiev, but he's not about to lose Crimea. Ari, back to you.
Thank you for that report, Jim Maceda in Moscow. We appreciate that. And here at home, Ukraine is, of course, on the mind of our political leaders, and that turns out to mean a lot of Republicans. Many sought to burnish their tough foreign policy credentials at this week's Conservative Political Action Conference, which all political junkies know as CPAC. Have a look.
You look at the last 5 years of President Obama, as hope has diminished across the world. As the people of Ukraine have seen Russian tanks move into their sovereign land, as the nation of Israel has been left without its friend and ally, the United States of America.
We're going to get what we see today in the Ukraine, where Vladimir Putin has a strategy and Obama has nothing, where Putin has a growing defense budget and ours is shrinking.
The president loves to point to Ronald Reagan and say, well, Reagan talked to Russia, Reagan talked to the Soviet Union, why can't we talk to Iran? But there's a difference. Reagan dealt with the Soviet Union because they had nuclear weapons and he wanted peace. But he never accepted the Soviet Union.
How can we appease a Syrian tyrant and embolden his Russian ally without the bill ever coming due? There is a price to be paid for policies that destroy our economy and embolden our foreign enemies.
Well, to put those foreign enemies in context, as well as neoconservatives and Tea Party conservatives, we have a pretty tremendous panel on the roots and the evolution of conservatism today and the progressive response. I'm going to bring you the panel. That's up next. Stay with us.